Welcome to a tour unlike any you've taken before. Today we're crossing the country, from the sun-baked hills of Hollywood to quiet churchyards in Maryland, from the sprawling memorial parks of the San Fernando Valley to forgotten plots in the rural South, to visit 50 people who once filled our screens, our radios, and our living rooms with something unforgettable. These are actors and entertainers whose names lit up marquees, whose voices became the soundtrack of American life. And yet, for all the fame they earned, the places where they rest have grown remarkably quiet. The fans stopped coming, the flowers dried up, the world moved on. But their stories haven't gone anywhere, and neither have they. So let's begin. We start in Finksburg, Maryland, a small, unincorporated community about 40 minutes northwest of Baltimore. Behind a modest stone church called Sandy Mount United Methodist sits a cemetery that stretches back toward rolling farmland. There are old obelisks near the church, newer markers farther out. And in the back section, near a distinctive gray headstone bearing the name Shannon, there is a patch of grass with nothing on it at all. No marker, no plaque, no name. This is the final resting place of Fred Gwynne. If the name doesn't ring a bell immediately, close your eyes and picture a 7-foot-tall Frankenstein parody in a suit and tie, grinning ear to ear, bumbling through a suburban home while his family of monsters tried to fit in with the neighbors. That was Herman Munster, and that was Fred Gwynne, and for 2 seasons in the mid-1960s, he made America laugh every week on the Munsters. But Gwynne was so much more than Herman. He was a Harvard graduate who had been president of the Harvard Lampoon. He served in the Navy during World War II as a radio man on a submarine chaser. He was a painter, a sculptor, and the author of 10 beloved children's books, including The King Who Reigned and A Chocolate Mousse for Dinner. And late in his career, he gave one of the great comedic film performances as the exasperated Southern judge in My Cousin Vinny, sparring with Joe Pesci in a courtroom exchange that still makes people howl. He also terrified a generation as the neighbor Judd Crandall in Stephen King's Pet Sematary. Gwynne spent his final years on a farm near Taneytown, Maryland, doing voiceover work for commercials, a man who wanted to be remembered as more than a sitcom monster. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died on July 2, 1993, 8 days shy of his 67th birthday. His funeral was private, and he was laid to rest here in an unmarked grave. No one is quite sure why. His daughter once told the Harvard Crimson that her father was a far more complex character than the one he played on the Munsters. Standing here, looking out across Maryland farmland that seems to go on forever, you get the sense that Fred Gwynne would have liked it that way. From Maryland, let's travel a long way, all the way to Hart Island, a narrow strip of land in the western end of Long Island Sound, just off the coast of the Bronx. For more than a century, Hart Island has served as New York City's public cemetery, the place where unclaimed and unidentified bodies are laid to rest. There are no headstones here, no family plots, no visitors' hours in the traditional sense. And somewhere on the northern end of this island lies Bobby Driscoll. That name may not mean much today, but in the late 1940s, Bobby Driscoll was one of the biggest child stars in America, and the first child actor ever placed under exclusive contract to Walt Disney Studios. He starred in Song of the South, So Dear to My Heart, and Treasure Island, where he played Jim Hawkins opposite Robert Newton's Long John Silver. He also provided the voice and the live-action reference model for the title character in Disney's animated Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. In 1950, at the age of 12, Bobby received a special Juvenile Academy Award for his performances in So Dear to My Heart and The Window. He was, by every measure, a golden child of Hollywood. But puberty came, and with it came acne and a deepened voice, and Disney declined to renew his contract. Hollywood had no use for a teenager who used to be adorable. Bobby struggled to find work, fell into drug addiction, and drifted to New York in the mid-1960s, hoping to restart his career on Broadway. No one would hire him. On March 30th, 1968, two boys playing in an abandoned tenement in the East Village found a body lying on a cot. There were empty beer bottles nearby and scattered religious pamphlets. No identification. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was heart failure brought on by hardened arteries, a consequence of years of heroin use. Bobby was 31. His body went unclaimed, unidentified, and was buried here on Hart Island in a mass grave. It was nearly 2 years before his mother, trying to arrange a reunion between Bobby and his dying father, contacted Disney Studios for help finding her son. A fingerprint match at the New York City Police Department confirmed what had happened. The voice of Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up, had died alone and anonymous in a city of 8 million people. His name appears on his father's gravestone at Eternal Hills Memorial Park in Oceanside, California, but his remains are still here on Hart Island in an unmarked grave that no one can visit. Let's head west now, to the sunshine and palm trees of Hollywood, California, and one of the most famous cemeteries in the world, Hollywood Forever. This 62-acre park sits right in the shadow of Paramount Studios, and it's home to more celebrity graves than any other cemetery on Earth. Rudolph Valentino is here, and Cecil B. DeMille and Judy Garland. But we're not here for them today. We're here for someone most people walk right past. Near the back of the cemetery, not far from a water pump station, there's a modest bronze plaque set flat in the ground. It reads, Florence Lawrence, the Biograph Girl, the first movie star. If you've never heard that name, you're not alone. But Florence Lawrence has a legitimate claim to a title no one else can match. In the earliest days of the motion picture industry, studios did not credit their actors by name. Audiences who loved the performers they saw on screen had no idea who they were. Florence, who appeared in nearly 300 films beginning around 1907, was known only as the Biograph Girl, after the Biograph company where she worked. It was producer Carole Lombard who changed everything. In 1910, he lured Florence away from Biograph and, in a brilliant publicity stunt, planted a false story that she had been killed in a streetcar accident. Then took out ads announcing that the story was a lie, and that Florence Lawrence, alive and well, was now working for his independent moving picture company. It was one of the first celebrity publicity stunts in history, and it made Florence Lawrence the first movie star known to the public by name. Her fame didn't last. She was severely burned in a studio fire in 1915 while trying to rescue a fellow performer, and her career never fully recovered. She also invented the first automotive turn signal and brake signal, though she never patented either one. By the late 1930s, she was working as a $75 a week extra at MGM, part of a charity program for aging silent film stars. Alone and suffering from a painful bone marrow disease, Florence ended her own life on December 27, 1938, at the age of 52. She was buried here at Hollywood Forever in an unmarked grave, and for 53 years, that's how it stayed. It wasn't until 1991 that actor Roddy McDowall, a devoted film historian, paid for the bronze marker that rests here now. The first movie star, forgotten for half a century, finally given a name. Just a short drive northeast from Hollywood Forever, we come to Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. This is one of the more famous cemeteries in the Los Angeles area. A sprawling green landscape overlooking the city, and the resting place of quite a few legends. In the Courts of Remembrance, tucked into a quiet alcove, rests Buster Keaton. Now, if there's a Mount Rushmore of silent film comedy, Buster Keaton is on it, right alongside Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd. But where Chaplin tugged at heartstrings and Lloyd dangled from buildings, Keaton did something nobody else could do. He performed the most dangerous, elaborate, jaw-dropping physical stunts imaginable, and he did them all with a completely deadpan expression. That stone face became his trademark. He didn't just perform in his films, he wrote and directed many of them, crafting visual gags so ingenious that filmmakers still study them a century later. The General, released in 1926, is regularly cited as one of the greatest comedies ever made. Steamboat Bill Jr. features a sequence where the facade of a building falls on Keaton, who survives only because he happens to be standing exactly where an open window passes over him. He did that stunt for real, with a real building facade, and the margin for error was inches. Keaton's career suffered when the studio system took away his creative freedom in the sound era. He battled alcoholism and obscurity for years. But he kept working, making appearances in films and on television into the 1960s, including a memorable turn on The Twilight Zone. In 1959, the Academy gave him an honorary Oscar for his unique talents, which brought immortal comedies to the screen. One of the most remarkable things about Keaton was that he did every stunt himself. There were no doubles, no safety nets, no trick photography. When a house falls on him in Steamboat Bill Jr., that's the real Buster Keaton standing in the path of a 2-ton wall. When a train crosses a collapsing bridge in The General, he's on the locomotive. His commitment to physical comedy was absolute, and the injuries he sustained over his career were considerable, including a broken neck he didn't even know about until years later when an X-ray revealed a healed fracture. Despite the decades of obscurity, Keaton's reputation was fully restored before his death. A new generation of filmmakers discovered his work in the 1960s, and today he's recognized not just as a comedian but as one of the great visual artists of cinema. Buster Keaton died of lung cancer on February 1, 1966. He was 70. Staying here at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills, let's walk over to another section to find someone from a very different corner of entertainment. Liberace, the man who made a sequined cape and a candelabra on a grand piano into the most flamboyant act in show business, is interred here in a sheltered area of the Courts of Remembrance. Born Wladzio Valentino Liberace in West Allis, Wisconsin, in 1919, he was a child prodigy on the piano who performed with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at the age of 14. But it wasn't classical music that made him a household name. It was television. Starting in the early 1950s, The Liberace Show brought his glittering, over-the-top performances into living rooms across America. He played popular standards and classical pieces with equal flair, always with a wink and a smile, always in costumes that got more extravagant every year. Fur capes, rhinestone-studded suits, rings on every finger. He became one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world, headlining in Las Vegas for decades. His Las Vegas residency at the Hilton and later at the Las Vegas Hilton drew packed houses year after year. Critics sometimes dismissed him, but Liberace had the perfect response. He once said he cried all the way to the bank. His personal life was the subject of intense speculation for decades. He denied persistent rumors about his sexuality throughout his life, and even won a defamation lawsuit against a British newspaper in 1959. He died on February 4, 1987, at the age of 67. The Riverside County coroner determined the cause of death was cardiac arrest due to heart failure brought on by complications from AIDS. He was among the most prominent public figures to die from the disease at that time. The Liberace Museum in Las Vegas, which opened in 1979, was for years one of the city's most popular tourist attractions, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors who marveled at his rhinestone-encrusted pianos, his fur capes, and his collection of antique and custom automobiles. The museum closed in 2010, and much of its contents were auctioned off. It was, in its way, a sign of how quickly even the most famous can fade from public consciousness. Liberace's grave here at Forest Lawn rarely draws the kind of crowds you might expect for a man who once sold out every showroom in Las Vegas. But for anyone who remembers the flash, the flair, and that irresistible smile, it's worth a visit. From the glitter of Liberace, let's take a sharp turn into something altogether different. We're heading south to Leesburg, Florida, and Hillcrest Memorial Gardens. Here, in this modest Central Florida cemetery, lies one of the most distinctive voices in the history of country music, Mel Tillis. If you grew up watching Hee Haw or The Tonight Show in the 70s and 80s, you remember Mel. Not just for his music, but for his stutter. Mel Tillis stuttered severely his entire life, except when he sang. When he opened his mouth to sing, the stutter vanished completely. and out came one of the smoothest baritone voices Nashville ever produced. He wrote more than 1,000 songs over his career, including hits for himself and for other artists. His own recordings include I Ain't Never, Good Woman Blues, and Coca-Cola Cowboy. He was named the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year in 1976. As a songwriter, he penned classics recorded by other artists, including Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town, which became a major hit for Kenny Rogers. Mel was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2007 and received the National Medal of Arts in 2012. He was also the father of country singer Pam Tillis, who had her own string of hits in the 1990s. Mel Tillis died on November 19, 2017, from respiratory failure due to intestinal issues. He was 85. Mel's stutter became paradoxically one of his greatest assets as a performer. He never tried to hide it. He leaned into it, making it part of his stage persona, and audiences loved him for it. The contrast between his halting speech and his flawless singing voice was striking and endearing. He was also one of the most prolific songwriters in Nashville, penning hits for himself and dozens of other artists over a career that spanned more than 50 years. His influence on country music extends far beyond his own recordings. He helped shape the sound of Nashville in the 1960s and 70s, a golden era for the genre. His grave in this quiet Florida cemetery is a long way from the bright lights of Nashville, and it doesn't get many visitors these days. Heading back to California, we find ourselves at Westwood Village Memorial Park, a small cemetery tucked behind office buildings and a movie theater in the heart of West Los Angeles. Don't let the size fool you. This is one of the most star-studded cemeteries in the world. Marilyn Monroe is here, and Dean Martin, and Natalie Wood. But there's another name here that deserves a visit, one you might walk right past if you weren't looking for it. In the southeast section of the grounds, there's a small flat marker for Jack Lemmon, just Jack Lemmon, and below that, his real name, John Euler Lemmon III, and the dates. And underneath, one final line that reads simply, "In." That's it. Just the word "in." It's a reference to an old actor's joke. When actors signed out of a studio for the day, they'd write "out" on the sign-out sheet. Jack Lemmon always wrote "in," meaning he was always available, always ready to work. And work he did, across one of the most distinguished careers in Hollywood history. Lemmon won 2 Academy Awards, Best Supporting Actor for Mr. Roberts in 1955 and Best Actor for Save the Tiger in 1973. He received 8 total Oscar nominations, a record few have matched. He could do comedy and drama with equal brilliance. In comedy, he was unforgettable as Jerry in Some Like It Hot alongside Tony Curtis and Marilyn Monroe, and as Felix Unger in The Odd Couple with Walter Matthau. That pairing with Matthau became one of the great screen partnerships, spanning 10 films over 3 decades. In drama, he was devastating in Days of Wine and Roses, The China Syndrome, Missing, and Glengarry Glen Ross. Jack Lemmon died on June 27, 2001, from metastatic cancer of the colon and bladder. He was 76. Lemmon's range was astonishing. He could make you laugh until your sides ached in one film and break your heart in the next. His performance in Days of Wine and Roses, as an advertising executive spiraling into alcoholism, is one of the most devastating portrayals of addiction ever filmed. And his work with director Billy Wilder, in Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, and others, produced some of the finest comedic performances in cinema history. Lemmon was also beloved by his peers. When asked about working with him, Walter Matthau once said something to the effect that Lemmon was the only actor he knew who could make being ordinary seem extraordinary. That was Lemmon's gift. He played regular men, flawed, decent, struggling men, and he made you care about every one of them. His marker here at Westwood is easy to miss, and that might be the most Jack Lemmon thing about it. Staying at Westwood for a moment, let's walk to another section of this compact cemetery. Not far from Lemmon, in an unmarked plot, rests George C. Scott. That's right, unmarked. One of the most commanding actors of the 20th century lies here without so much as a nameplate to identify him. George C. Scott is best remembered for one role above all others: General George S. Patton in the 1970 film Patton. His performance was volcanic, a swaggering, profane, brilliant portrayal of the legendary World War II commander that earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor, which he famously refused. Scott called the Oscar ceremony a 2-hour meat parade and declined to attend or accept the award. It was one of the most talked about moments in Oscar history. But Patton was only the peak of a mountain. Scott was a powerhouse on stage and screen for decades. He earned another Oscar nomination for The Hustler, playing the cold-blooded gambler Burt Gordon opposite Paul Newman. He was terrifying in the hospital, magnificent in Dr. Strangelove as the trigger-happy General Buck Turgidson, and unforgettable in The Changeling. Scott was also one of the finest stage actors of his generation, performing Shakespeare and O'Neill with a ferocity that could fill a theater. He died on September 22, 1999, at the age of 71 from a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. He was buried here in an unmarked grave, right next to Walter Matthau. Two giants of American film, side by side, with nothing to mark either of them but grass and sky. From Westwood, we'll drive north through the San Fernando Valley to Chatsworth and Oakwood Memorial Park. In the Vale of Memory section, along a narrow path, rests Ginger Rodgers. Now, there's a famous quip, attributed to various people over the years, that Ginger Rodgers did everything Fred Astaire did, except backwards and in high heels. Whether or not that's entirely fair to Fred, it speaks to the extraordinary skill of a woman who was far more than just half of a dance team. Ginger Rodgers won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1941 for Kitty Foyle, a dramatic role that had nothing to do with dancing. She was a serious, accomplished actress who could hold her own in comedy, drama, and romance. But it is the dancing that endures. Ginger and Fred Astaire first appeared together in Flying Down to Rio in 1933, and the chemistry was instantaneous. They made 10 films together, and their dance numbers, set to songs by Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, Jerome Kern, and the Gershwins, are among the most beautiful sequences ever committed to film. After the partnership with Astaire ended, Ginger continued to work steadily in film, and later in television and theater, including a successful run on Broadway in Hello, Dolly. She lived a long life, passing away on April 25, 1995, at the age of 83 from natural causes. After her film career wound down, Ginger reinvented herself on the stage. She toured extensively in theatrical productions and took on roles that showcased the dramatic talent that had always been there beneath the dance numbers. She was also a painter and a businesswoman, owning a ranch in Oregon where she lived for many years. She was married 5 times, a fact that sometimes overshadowed her professional achievements, though she spoke about her personal life with characteristic humor and candor. Ginger Rodgers remains one of the most versatile performers Hollywood ever produced. A woman who could toe tap with Fred Astaire, hold her own in screwball comedy, and win an Oscar for a straight dramatic role, all without breaking a sweat. Her grave at Oakwood is a peaceful spot in a quiet cemetery that doesn't draw the crowds you might expect for a woman who danced her way into immortality. Let's leave California behind for a while and travel to the heart of the country. We're in Indianapolis, Indiana, at Crown Hill Cemetery, one of the largest and most historic cemeteries in the United States. Presidents and poets are buried here, but so is someone a lot of kids from the 60s and 70s remember with a particular kind of warmth. In the Given family mausoleum rests Fred Rodgers, Mr. Rogers. From 1968 to 2001, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was a gentle, steady presence on public television. Fred Rogers looked into the camera and told children they were special just the way they were, and a generation believed him. The show earned him a Peabody Award, induction into the Television Hall of Fame, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rogers was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and his kindness wasn't an act. By every account from everyone who knew him, the man on camera and the man off camera were the same person. He held over 40 honorary degrees. He once testified before the United States Senate when funding for public television was on the chopping block, and his quiet, earnest words convinced a skeptical senator to preserve the funding. That clip still circulates online and still moves people to tears. Fred Rogers died of stomach cancer on February 27, 2003. He was 74. Given was the family name of his great-grandmother, which is why the family mausoleum bears that name. Rogers was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and his kindness wasn't an act. By every account from everyone who knew him, the man on camera and the man off camera were the same person. He held over 40 honorary degrees. He once testified before the United States Senate when funding for public television was on the chopping block, and his quiet, earnest words convinced a skeptical senator to preserve the funding. That clip still circulates online and still moves people to tears. When asked about his approach to children's television, Rogers said he simply tried to give children what he wished someone had given him when he was young, the assurance that they mattered. Fred Rogers died of stomach cancer on February 27, 2003. He was 74. It's a beautiful spot in a beautiful cemetery, but for a man who touched millions of lives, it sees remarkably few visitors. While we're in Indiana, let's drive about an hour southeast to Shelbyville and Forest Hill Cemetery. Here's a story that connects two very different eras of American entertainment. James Pierce was the fourth actor to play Tarzan on film, personally chosen for the role by Tarzan's creator, Edgar Rice Burroughs himself. Pierce first appeared as the jungle hero in Tarzan and the Golden Lion in 1927, and he went on to voice the character on a national radio program that ran for years in the 1930s. Pierce was a big, athletic man. He had played football at Indiana University, and he brought a physical credibility to the role that audiences responded to. In a twist that sounds like it belongs in a Hollywood screenplay, he married Joan Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs' own daughter. Joan joined him on the Tarzan radio show, voicing Jane, and the two became inseparable both on and off the air. Their headstones here in Shelbyville read simply Tarzan and Jane. It's a charming detail from a man who clearly had a sense of humor about the role that defined his life. James Pierce died in 1983 at the age of 83. His grave here, with that whimsical inscription, rarely receives visitors anymore, but it's one of the more delightful stops on any cemetery tour. From Indiana, let's push further south to Nashville, Tennessee, and a cemetery that country music fans will recognize. At Woodlawn Memorial Park, in a quiet section away from the road, lies Tammy Wynette, the First Lady of country music. If you know one song from the golden age of Nashville, it might be "Stand By Your Man," and if it is, you know Tammy Wynette. That song, released in 1968, became one of the best-selling country singles of all time and made Tammy a superstar overnight. But she was so much more than one song. Over her career, she placed 20 #1 hits on the country charts, including "Divorce" and "Till I Can Make It on My Own." She won 2 Grammy Awards and was the first woman to sell 1 million copies of an album in country music. Her personal life was as dramatic as any country song. She was married 5 times, most famously to fellow country star George Jones. Their turbulent relationship produced some of the greatest duets in country music history, including "Golden Ring" and "We're Gonna Hold On." Tammy suffered from chronic health problems for much of her adult life, undergoing numerous surgeries. She died on April 6, 1998, at the age of 55, from a blood clot in her lung. She was buried here at Woodlawn in a private ceremony. For years after her death, fans made the pilgrimage, but these days the crowds have thinned, and the First Lady rests in relative quiet. Speaking of country legends, let's take a short drive from Nashville to Hendersonville, just northeast of the city, to visit someone whose name you'll find in every conversation about the greatest musicians in American history. At Hendersonville Memory Gardens rests Johnny Cash, the Man in Black, buried beside his wife, June Carter Cash. Now, Johnny Cash is hardly forgotten. His music is as alive as ever, and the 2005 film Walk the Line brought his story to a whole new generation. But his actual grave, in this suburban memorial garden, is not the kind of pilgrimage destination you might expect for a man of his stature. Cash was a singer and songwriter who defied genre. He's the only person inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. His signature songs, Folsom Prison Blues, I Walk the Line, Ring of Fire, are woven into the fabric of American music. And late in his career, his stark, stripped-down cover of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt introduced him to an entirely new audience and reminded the world of his extraordinary depth as an artist. His wife, June Carter Cash, rests beside him, and she deserves her own story. Right beside Johnny, at the same memorial garden, rests the woman who was the love of his life and a formidable artist in her own right. June Carter Cash, born into the legendary Carter family, was a 5-time Grammy-winning singer and songwriter in her own right. She and Johnny became a country music power couple whose love story, with all its turbulence and tenderness, became the stuff of legend. June died on May 15, 2003, from complications of heart surgery. She was 73. Johnny followed just 4 months later, on September 12, 2003, from complications of diabetes. He was 71. Many believe he died of a broken heart. Now let's shift gears entirely and head to the Pacific Northwest. In Portland, Oregon, at Riverview Cemetery, a beautiful hilltop park overlooking the Willamette River, rests a man who was once one of the biggest comedy stars on television. Here lies McLean Stevenson. If that name doesn't immediately click, try this. Colonel Henry Blake on M***, A**S*H. Stevenson played the affable, overwhelmed commanding officer of the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital for the first 3 seasons of the show, and his character's departure in 1975 produced one of the most shocking moments in television history. In the final scene of the episode, Radar O'Reilly walks into the operating room and reads a message informing the doctors that Colonel Blake's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. Audiences were stunned. It was one of the first times a major character on a comedy series was killed off, and it fundamentally changed what television was willing to do. Stevenson left the show hoping to become a bigger star on his own, but the roles that followed never matched the success of M***A**S*H. He starred in a string of short-lived series throughout the late 70s and 80s, none of which caught on. Still, his work as Colonel Blake remains beloved. The lesson of McLean Stevenson's career is one that Hollywood has taught many times. There's no guarantee that leaving a hit show will lead to something bigger, but Stevenson himself never seemed bitter about it. In interviews, he spoke fondly of his time on M***A**S*H and of his castmates, and he remained a warm, likable presence on television even when the shows around him didn't measure up. He also had a respectable career in stand-up comedy and dinner theater. McLean Stevenson died on February 15, 1996, from a heart attack following bladder cancer surgery. He was 68. His grave here at Riverview Cemetery, with its panoramic views of Portland, is a fitting resting place for a man who always seemed most comfortable when he was a little bit out of his element. From Portland, let's fly south to Culver City, California, and Holy Cross Cemetery, one of the great Catholic cemeteries in the Los Angeles area. In the grotto section, among quite a few legends, rests someone whose very name conjures images of old Hollywood glamour, Rita Hayworth. Born Margarita Cancino, she began her career as a dancer and by the early 1940s had become Hollywood's reigning glamour queen and one of the most popular pin-up girls among American servicemen during World War II. Her performance in the 1946 film Gilda made her a cultural icon. That image of her in a black satin dress, peeling off a glove, is one of the most famous shots in movie history. She starred opposite Orson Welles in The Lady from Shanghai, and her Technicolor musical performances in films like CoverGirl showcased her extraordinary talent as a dancer. In 1949, she married Prince Ali Khan, making her the first Hollywood actress to become a genuine princess. But the fairy tale didn't last. Later in life, Rita was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, long before the condition was widely understood. She became one of the first public faces of the illness, helping to raise awareness at a time when many people had never heard of it. Rita Hayworth died on May 14, 1987, at the age of 68 from complications of Alzheimer's. What many people don't realize about Rita Hayworth is that the glamorous image was largely manufactured. Born into a family of Spanish dancers, she was trained by her father from childhood, sometimes harshly. The studio changed her name, dyed her hair, and altered her hairline through electrolysis to create the all-American beauty the public fell in love with. In many ways, Rita Hayworth the person was hidden behind Rita Hayworth the star. She was married 5 times, including to Orson Welles and Prince Ali Khan, and none of those marriages brought her the stability she craved. Her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, became an advocate for Alzheimer's research in her mother's honor. Rita Hayworth's grave at Holy Cross, once a major destination for fans, has grown quieter with each passing decade. While we're at Holy Cross, let's walk to another section of the cemetery to find someone from the world of comedy. Here rests Jimmy Durante. If you're under 60, you might not know the name, but your grandparents certainly did. Jimmie Durante was one of the most beloved entertainers of the 20th century. A vaudeville star, Broadway performer, radio personality, film actor, and television host whose career spanned more than 5 decades. He was instantly recognizable. The enormous nose he affectionately called the schnozola, the gravelly voice, the fractured grammar, the battered hat. His catchphrases, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are," and "I've got a million of them," were part of the American vernacular for generations. Durante appeared in dozens of films and was a fixture on radio and television from the 1930s through the 60s. His recording of "Make Someone Happy" has endured as a standard, finding new life in the soundtrack of Sleepless in Seattle decades later. He was also one of the most genuinely kind people in show business, known for his warmth toward fans and fellow performers alike. Jimmy Durante died on January 29, 1980, from pneumonia. He was 86. As for Mrs. Calabash, Durante never revealed who she was, though many believe it was a pet name for his beloved first wife Jean Olsen, who died of heart disease in 1943. Leaving Holy Cross behind, let's travel to the San Fernando Valley and Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, not to be confused with the Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills where we visited Buster Keaton and Liberace earlier. Forest Lawn Glendale is one of the most famous cemeteries in the world, home to an astonishing number of Hollywood legends. Many of its most prominent residents are in private, restricted areas, but the Great Mausoleum, with its Renaissance-inspired statuary and stained glass, is open to visitors who know where to look. In the Sanctuary of Trust, within the Great Mausoleum, rests Carole Lombard alongside her husband, Clark Gable. By the late 1930s, Carole Lombard was the highest-paid actress in Hollywood and one of the most popular. This blonde, blue-eyed, sometimes foul-mouthed beauty had a gift for screwball comedy that was unmatched. Her performance in My Man Godfrey earned her an Oscar nomination, and films like 20th Century and Nothing Sacred cemented her status as the queen of a genre. She married Clark Gable in 1939, and they were, by all accounts, the great love story of that era of Hollywood. After the United States entered World War II, Carole threw herself into the war effort, traveling the country to sell war bonds. On January 15, 1942, returning from a war bond rally in her home state of Indiana, where she had helped raise over $2 million, the plane carrying Carole Lombard crashed into Mount Potosi near Las Vegas. Everyone aboard was killed. Carole was 33. She was the first woman killed in the line of duty during World War II, and President Roosevelt sent a personal telegram of condolence to Clark Gable. Carole Lombard was just 33 years old, the same age as the century she had helped define. Her death devastated Hollywood. Clark Gable, by all accounts, was never the same. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps shortly after her death and flew combat missions over Germany, leading some to believe he was seeking his own death. He survived the war, continued acting, and married twice more, but friends said he never got over Carole. When Gable died in 1960, at the age of 59, from a heart attack, he was entombed here beside her, reunited at last. It had been 18 years. Stepping out of the Great Mausoleum and into the sunlit grounds of Forest Lawn, Glendale, let's find someone from the world of music. In the Freedom Mausoleum rests Nat King Cole. Before there was a Motown sound, before rock and roll reshaped American music, there was the velvet voice of Nat King Cole. He began as a jazz pianist, a brilliant one, leading the King Cole Trio in the 1940s. But it was his singing that made him a crossover superstar. Songs like Unforgettable, Mona Lisa, Nature Boy, and the Christmas Song became permanent fixtures of the American songbook. Mona Lisa topped the charts for 8 weeks in 1950 and won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. In 1956, Nat King Cole became the first African American to host a national television variety show, The Nat King Cole Show. The show was critically praised but struggled to find sponsors, with many national advertisers afraid of alienating Southern viewers. Despite its quality, the show was canceled after just one season. Cole was also a capable actor, appearing in films like Cat Ballou and St. Louis Blues, where he portrayed W.C. Handy. Nat King Cole died of lung cancer on February 15, 1965. He was just 45, far too young. His daughter Natalie would later record a digitally enhanced duet with her father's original vocal on Unforgettable, which won the Grammy for Record of the Year in 1992, 27 years after his death. That's the kind of voice that doesn't fade. From Ohio, let's push north to the Great Lakes. We're in Glenview, Illinois, at a small cemetery called St. Samaria, which sits behind the Assyrian church of the same name. Here rests someone whose voice you've heard 1,000 times, even if you've never seen his face. This is the grave of Don Pardo, the legendary announcer of Saturday Night Live. For 38 seasons, from the show's debut in 1975 until his death in 2014, Don Pardo's booming baritone opened every episode of Saturday Night Live, reading the cast roll call with an enthusiasm that never wavered. He was in his 70s when the show started, and in his 90s when he recorded his final introductions. Before SNL, Pardo had already been a fixture at NBC for decades, serving as the announcer for the original version of The Price is Right and for NBC's news division. He was the NBC staff announcer who broke into regular programming on November 22, 1963, to deliver the first bulletin that President Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. Don Pardo died on August 18, 2014, in Tucson, Arizona, at the age of 96. His remains were brought here to Glenview, where his wife's Assyrian family had roots. What made Pardo's voice so distinctive wasn't just its power, it was his enthusiasm. Even after decades of reading cast names, his delivery never sounded tired or rote. Every "Live from New York, it's Saturday night" felt like the first time. Lorne Michaels, the creator and producer of Saturday Night Live, once said that the show wouldn't have been the same without Pardo's voice, that it gave the show a sense of occasion and excitement that no one else could replicate. When Pardo finally stopped recording introductions, the show experimented briefly with other announcers before settling on Darrell Hammond, who adopted a style that deliberately echoed Pardo's. It's an unexpected resting place for a man whose voice defined Saturday nights for 2 generations, but Don Pardo earned every bit of that legacy. From Connecticut, let's head on to Long Island proper. We're at Pine Lawn Memorial Park in Farmingdale, New York, and we're looking for a man who made New Year's Eve in America sound the way it does. On the outer wall of the mausoleum, we find the crypt of Guy Lombardo. For almost 50 years, Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians performed on New Year's Eve, and their rendition of Auld Lang Syne became so closely associated with the holiday that it's hard to hear the song without thinking of that big band sound. Lombardo's career began in his native Canada, where he formed the band with his brothers in the early 1920s. They went on to become one of the most popular dance bands of the big band era, selling hundreds of millions of records over a career that spanned decades. For an entire generation of Americans, the countdown to midnight was incomplete without Guy Lombardo on the television. When he performed his final New Year's Eve concert in 1976, it marked the end of an era that had lasted nearly half a century. Guy Lombardo died on November 5, 1977, at the age of 75. and is entombed here alongside two of his brothers and bandmates, Carmen, who played saxophone and flute, and Lebert, who played trumpet. The mausoleum at Pine Lawn holds quite a few notable names. Count Basie is just a few spaces away, but Lombardo's crypt, the one that belonged to the man who owned New Year's Eve, doesn't draw the holiday crowds it once did. We'll stay on Long Island a little longer, heading east to Flushing Cemetery in Queens. Here, in an unmarked grave, rests one of the towering figures of American music, Dizzy Gillespie. That's right, the man who helped invent bebop, who revolutionized jazz with his virtuosic trumpet playing, whose bent horn and puffed cheeks became icons of the genre, lies in an unmarked grave in Queens. Dizzy Gillespie was one of the most important musicians of the 20th century. Along with Charlie Parker, he pioneered the bebop style that transformed jazz from dance music into an art form. His compositions, A Night in Tunisia and Salt Peanuts, are jazz standards. He toured the world for decades, served as an unofficial cultural ambassador for the United States, and influenced every jazz trumpeter who came after him. In 1989, he even ran for president, largely as a publicity stunt, but with characteristically infectious joy. Dizzy Gillespie died of pancreatic cancer on January 6, 1993, at the age of 75. He rests here next to his mother. The lack of a marker is a quiet injustice for a man who made so much noise in the best possible way. Leaving New York, let's make our way to a place that holds a special significance in the history of American entertainment. We're in Genoa, Ohio, at a small cemetery called Clay Township Cemetery. Here, in a modest grave far from any spotlight, rests one of the Three Stooges. This is the grave of Danny Thomas. Wait, that's not right. Let me take you to the correct spot. We're actually heading to Los Angeles now, to Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood, where one of America's most distinctive character actors rests. This is the grave of Oliver Hardy, the larger half of the greatest comedy duo in motion picture history. Laurel and Hardy made over 100 films together between the 1920s and the 1950s, and their slapstick routines, the piano up the stairs, the pie fights, the fine messes, have been making people laugh for nearly a century. Oliver Hardy, born Norvell Hardy in Harlem, Georgia, in 1892, was the round, mustachioed, long-suffering straight man who always ended up on the wrong end of the chaos Stan Laurel set in motion. His slow burn, that exasperated look directly into the camera, was his comic signature. After the partnership with Laurel effectively ended in the early 50s, Hardy's health declined rapidly. He suffered a series of strokes that left him bedridden. Stan Laurel, devoted to his partner to the end, visited him often, but was too distraught to attend his funeral. Oliver Hardy died on August 7, 1957, at the age of 65. His grave at Valhalla is modest and, these days, rarely visited. Stan Laurel, who died in 1965, is buried across town at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. The two men had a partnership that lasted over 30 years, and their chemistry on screen remains one of the marvels of cinema. Hardy's contribution to the team is sometimes overlooked. Laurel got more credit as the creative force behind their films, and rightfully so. But Hardy's reactions, his slow burns, his wounded dignity, his tie fiddling, these were the things that made the comedy sing. He was the anchor, the one who grounded the chaos in something recognizable and human. Between the two of them, you'd think more comedy fans would make the trip to pay their respects. But in a city full of celebrity graves, even Laurel and Hardy can get lost in the crowd. From one comedy legend to another, let's head to Palm Desert, California, and the Desert Memorial Park. Here, in Section B6, rests the man who was once the most famous entertainer on planet Earth, Bob Hope. For more than 6 decades, Bob Hope was a fixture in American entertainment, as a comedian, actor, singer, and tireless supporter of American troops overseas. He hosted the Academy Awards ceremony 19 times, more than anyone else. He entertained troops during World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf War, performing in combat zones around the world at enormous personal risk. His road movies with Bing Crosby, Road to Morocco, Road to Singapore, and 5 more, were among the highest-grossing comedies of the 1940s. He starred on radio, in films, and on television for decades, becoming so synonymous with entertainment that he received 5 honorary Academy Awards, a record. Hope was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was also, by some accounts, the wealthiest entertainer in America, thanks to decades of smart real estate investments in the San Fernando Valley. Bob Hope died on July 27, 2003, at the age of 100, just 2 months after his centennial birthday. Hope's relationship with the military was perhaps his greatest legacy. Over a span of nearly 50 years, from World War II through the Gulf War, he traveled to combat zones around the world to perform for American troops. These weren't token appearances. Hope put himself in genuine danger, performing near front lines in Korea and Vietnam, bringing a taste of home to soldiers who were thousands of miles from it. The troops adored him, and the feeling was mutual. Hope often said that entertaining the military was the thing he was most proud of in his entire career. He was also, by all accounts, a relentless worker. Even in his 90s, he was still doing shows, still telling jokes, still working a room with the timing and confidence of a man half his age. His grave here at Desert Memorial Park, in the arid landscape of the California desert, doesn't draw the pilgrimages you might expect for a man who spent a lifetime making the whole world laugh. Perhaps that's because Hope's legacy lives on in so many other places, in the USO, in the Academy Awards, in the very idea of what a comedian could be. Still in the greater Los Angeles area, let's make our way to Forest Lawn Cypress, one of the less visited forest lawn properties in Southern California. Here, in a quiet section of the grounds, rests one of the most talented and troubled actors of his generation, Richard Pryor. There is perhaps no comedian in history who had a greater influence on the art form than Richard Pryor. He transformed stand-up comedy from a business of jokes and punchlines into a vehicle for raw, confessional, brutally honest storytelling. He talked about race, poverty, addiction, and pain with a fearlessness that hadn't been seen before and hasn't been equaled since. His concert films, Richard Pryor, Live in Concert, and Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip, are considered among the greatest stand-up performances ever recorded. On screen, he was equally magnetic. His partnership with Gene Wilder in films like Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil produced some of the funniest moments in 80s comedy. He also turned in serious dramatic performances that showed the full range of his talent. Pryor won 5 Grammy Awards for his comedy albums and an Emmy for a writing stint on a Lily Tomlin special. His personal life was marked by tragedy. Multiple marriages, struggles with cocaine and alcohol, and a horrific incident in 1980 when he set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine, suffering burns over more than half his body. He was later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which gradually took away his ability to perform. Richard Pryor died on December 10, 2005, from a heart attack following years of illness. He was 65. His grave at Forest Lawn Cypress doesn't draw the crowds that a comedian of his stature might warrant. What made Pryor revolutionary wasn't just that he talked about race or drugs or poverty on stage. Other comedians had done that. It was how he did it. He inhabited characters. He became the wino on the corner, the preacher in the pulpit, his own father, his own demons. He made audiences laugh at things they thought they shouldn't laugh at, and in doing so, he made them see the world differently. Pryor paved the way for every comedian who has ever used the stage to tell the truth about their life, from Eddie Murphy to Dave Chappelle to Hannah Gadsby. His grave at Forest Lawn Cypress doesn't draw the crowds that a comedian of his stature might warrant. But then again, Pryor was never about the crowds. He was about the truth. Let's leave Southern California and head to an entirely different landscape. We're in Saratoga, New York at Greenridge Cemetery, a small and historic burial ground in the Spa City. Here lies a man whose voice shaped the way an entire generation experienced suspense. Rod Serling. If you've ever heard the words, "You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind," then you know Rod Serling. As the creator, host, and primary writer of The Twilight Zone, Serling became one of the most recognizable figures in American television. The series, which ran from 1959 to 1964, was ostensibly a science fiction anthology show, but Serling used its fantastical premises to address racism, conformity, war, McCarthyism, and other issues that network censors wouldn't allow in realistic dramas. He wrote or co-wrote 92 of the show's 156 episodes, an astonishing feat of sustained creativity. Before The Twilight Zone, Serling was already one of the most acclaimed writers in television, winning 6 Emmy Awards for his teleplays, including Patterns and Requiem for a Heavyweight. After the show ended, he co-wrote the screenplay for the original Planet of the Apes. Rod Serling died on June 28, 1975, during open-heart surgery at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. He was just 50. He was buried here in Saratoga, a town he loved, far from Hollywood. His grave is simple and unadorned, fitting for a man who believed in the power of words over spectacle. From New York State, let's head south to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We're at Mount Lawn Cemetery in Sharon Hill, just outside the city. In Section C of this cemetery rests someone widely regarded as the greatest female blues singer who ever lived, Bessie Smith. In the 1920s and 30s, Bessie Smith was the most popular and highest-paid black entertainer in America, the Empress of the Blues. Her first recording, Downhearted Blues, was a sensation in 1923, and she became a star of unparalleled magnitude in the world of blues and jazz. Her powerful voice influenced every singer who came after her, from Billie Holiday to Janis Joplin. Bessie's personal life was as dramatic and sometimes as painful as her music. She drank heavily, she loved fiercely, and she lived on her own terms in an era when a black woman doing so was an act of defiance in itself. Her career faded during the Great Depression, but she was working on a comeback when tragedy struck. On September 26, 1937, Bessie was killed in a car accident on Route 61 in Mississippi. She was 43. She was buried here at Mount Lawn, and for years, her grave was unmarked. It wasn't until 1970 that a headstone was finally placed, paid for jointly by Janis Joplin, and a woman named Juanita Green, who had been Bessie's former housekeeper and who had been putting flowers on the unmarked plot for 3 decades. The headstone Joplin helped pay for reads simply, "The greatest blues singer in the world will never stop singing." It's a fitting tribute, if a belated one. Bessie Smith's recordings, despite being nearly a century old, still carry an emotional power that defies time. Her influence stretches far beyond the blues. She helped shape jazz, gospel, rock and roll, and soul music. Every female vocalist who ever belted a song from the gut owes something to Bessie Smith. Even now, the Empress of the Blues doesn't get the foot traffic she deserves. Not far from Philadelphia, in Balasinwood, Pennsylvania, at West Laurel Hill Cemetery, we find another entertainment figure whose name might not ring a bell at first, but whose work you've definitely experienced. Here rests Ernie Kovacs. In the early days of television, when most shows were essentially radio programs with a camera pointed at them, Ernie Kovacs saw the medium for what it could actually be. He was a pioneer of visual comedy on television, using camera tricks, editing, sound effects, and unconventional formats in ways that no one else was doing in the 1950s. He created sketches and routines that were decades ahead of their time, absurdist, surreal, and sometimes breathtakingly inventive. His influence runs through Monty Python, David Letterman, Saturday Night Live, and virtually every comedy show that has ever tried to push the boundaries of what TV can do. Kovacs appeared on multiple shows, including his own Ernie Kovacs Show, and was a recognizable character actor in Hollywood films. He was married to singer and actress Edie Adams, who spent years after his death paying off his debts and preserving his legacy. Ernie Kovacs died on January 13, 1962, when he lost control of his car on a rain-slicked road in Beverly Hills after leaving a party. He was 42. Kovacs' death was a tremendous loss for television. He was only 42 and was just beginning to get the recognition and creative freedom he deserved. His wife, Edie Adams, spent years after his death paying off his considerable debts. He lived extravagantly, while also working tirelessly to preserve his television legacy. Many of his kinescopes and videotapes were thought to be lost, and the effort to recover and restore them has been ongoing for decades. What survives confirms his genius. Sketches and routines that look like they could have been produced yesterday, so far ahead of their time, were they? His grave here at West Laurel Hill is a quiet spot for a man who was anything but quiet in life, but anyone who cares about the history of television comedy should know this name. Let's travel further south to Mount Hope Cemetery in Franklin, Tennessee, just below Nashville. Here we find an icon of country comedy, Minnie Pearl. For more than 50 years, Sarah Ophelia Colley Cannon, Minnie Pearl was the character, greeted audiences at the Grand Ole Opry with her trademark cry of "Howdy, I'm just so proud to be here," in her thrift store dress and straw hat with the price tag still dangling from the brim. That price tag, $1.98, became one of the most recognizable props in entertainment history. Minnie Pearl was a fixture of the Grand Ole Opry from 1940 onward and became a mainstay of the television show Hee Haw for its entire run. Behind the folksy character was a shrewd and intelligent woman. Cannon was college-educated, well-read, and a savvy businesswoman. She was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1975. In 1991, she suffered a debilitating stroke that ended her performing career. Sarah Cannon died on March 4, 1996, at the age of 83 from complications of the stroke. Her grave at Mount Hope is peaceful but seldom visited, which would probably make the real woman behind Minnie Pearl a little sad. She always did love having company. From Tennessee, let's cross the Mississippi and head deep into the South. We're in Meridian, Mississippi, at Rose Hill Cemetery, and we're visiting someone whose music changed the world before he even turned 30. This is the grave of Jimmie Rodgers, the father of country music. Now, that's a big title, but Rodgers earned it. In the late 1920s, Jimmie Rodgers made some of the first commercially successful country music recordings, pioneering a style that blended blues, folk, and yodeling into something entirely new. Songs like Blue Yodel and In the Jailhouse Now made him the first star of the genre. He was the first person inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame when it was established in 1961. Rodgers' career was cut tragically short by tuberculosis, the disease that would kill him at the age of 35 on May 26, 1933. In fact, during his final recording sessions in New York, he was so weak that he had to rest on a cot between takes. He died in his hotel room 2 days after the sessions concluded. His influence on country music is immeasurable. Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, and Johnny Cash all cited him as a primary inspiration. Rodgers' influence on the musicians who followed him is hard to overstate. He essentially created the template for the country music singer-songwriter, a man with a guitar, singing about heartbreak and hard times and the open road. His yodeling, which he called blue yodeling, was a technique he picked up from railroad workers during his years as a brakeman on the Southern Railroad, and it became his signature sound. He recorded more than 100 songs in his brief career, many of which became country standards. Meridian has honored him with a museum and an annual festival, but despite his foundational importance to an entire genre of American music, his grave here is not a place most people think to visit. Maybe that will change someday. The father of country music deserves more company. Heading north from New Orleans, let's make a stop in Memphis, Tennessee. We're not going to Graceland. Elvis gets plenty of visitors. Instead, we're heading to Memorial Park Cemetery on the south side of the city, where a far less famous but deeply important figure in American music rests. This is the grave of Sam Phillips. If you don't know the name, you know what he did. Sam Phillips founded Sun Records in Memphis in 1952, and over the next few years, he discovered and recorded some of the most important artists in the history of rock and roll: Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison, and Howlin' Wolf, among others. Phillips is often credited with being the man who created rock and roll, or at the very least, the man who opened the door for it. He heard something in the music of young Southern performers, both black and white, that no one else in the recording industry was paying attention to. His studio at 706 Union Avenue in Memphis is now a museum and a National Historic Landmark. Sam Phillips died on July 30, 2003, at the age of 80. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, not as a performer, but as a non-performer, one of the few people honored for their behind-the-scenes contributions to the music. His grave at Memorial Park is simple, and for the man who gave us Elvis, it gets surprisingly few visitors. From Memphis, we travel northeast to Lexington, Kentucky, and the Lexington Cemetery. Here, in this handsome old cemetery on the edge of downtown, rests a man whose work brought some of the most memorable characters in movie history to life, even though you never saw his face on screen. This is the grave of Ken Curtis, best known to television audiences as Festus Hagen on Gunsmoke. For 11 seasons, from 1964 to 1975, Curtis played the scruffy, lovable deputy to James Arness's Marshall Dillon, and his portrayal became one of the most popular supporting performances in the history of television westerns. What most people don't know is that before he was an actor, Ken Curtis was a singer. He was the vocalist for the Sons of the Pioneers, the legendary Western singing group co-founded by Roy Rogers. He also sang with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. His acting career included roles in several John Ford westerns, including The Searchers and The Quiet Man. Curtis was married for a time to John Ford's daughter, Barbara. Ken Curtis died of a heart attack on April 28, 1991, at the age of 74. His grave in Lexington, where he had roots, is not a place most Gunsmoke fans know about. Staying in Kentucky, let's drive west to Maysville and St. Patrick's Cemetery. Here we find another Kentucky native whose voice graced some of the most beloved recordings of the 20th century, Rosemary Clooney. As a singer, Rosemary was known for sunny, effortless pop hits in the 1950s like Mambo Italiano and Come On to My House. But she also brought her talents to the screen, most memorably alongside Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye in the 1954 holiday classic White Christmas. She later reinvented herself as a jazz vocalist, earning critical acclaim and the respect of her peers for sophisticated, mature interpretations of the Great American Songbook. Her personal life included struggles with addiction and mental health, but she emerged from those dark years to enjoy a remarkable late-career renaissance. Rosemary was also the aunt of George Clooney, who adored her and has spoken often about her influence on his life. She was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2001 and continued performing until the very end. Rosemary Clooney died on June 29, 2002, at the age of 74. Her grave in Maysville, the town where she grew up, is the kind of place you'd have to go looking for. Most people don't. Let's head back to the West Coast for a very different kind of story. We're in Glendale, California, at Grandview Memorial Park, visiting the grave of someone who burned brighter and faster than almost anyone in Hollywood, John Belushi. Actually, let me correct that. Belushi was buried on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, where he had a home. Let me take us to the right place. We're on the island of Martha's Vineyard now, at Abel's Hill Cemetery in Chilmark, a quiet rural cemetery surrounded by stone walls and scrubby pines. Here lies John Belushi, the explosive, unpredictable, larger-than-life comedian who was one of the original cast members of Saturday Night Live and the star of one of the greatest comedies ever made, National Lampoon's Animal House. Belushi's energy was volcanic. As Bluto Blutarsky in Animal House, he created one of the most iconic characters in film comedy. On Saturday Night Live, his impressions, his physical comedy, and his sheer force of personality made him one of the most popular performers in the show's history. He was also half of the Blues Brothers with Dan Aykroyd, a musical comedy act that produced a hit album and a classic film. But Belushi's off-screen life was fueled by the same excess that powered his performances. His drug use was well known and widely feared by those who loved him. On March 5, 1982, John Belushi died in a bungalow at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in Hollywood from a combined injection of cocaine and heroin. He was 33 years old. His grave at Abel's Hill was originally marked with a headstone that read, in part, "I may be gone, but rock and roll lives on." The stone had to be moved because too many fans were partying at the gravesite. A replacement marker was placed in a slightly different spot, and the original stone was relocated by the family. These days, the partiers have moved on, and John Belushi's grave is a much quieter place than it used to be. From New England, let's head back to the Midwest. We're in DeKalb, Texas. Actually, let me redirect us. We're going to Fairmount, Indiana, to Park Cemetery. This small-town Indiana cemetery holds the grave of someone who became an icon with just 3 films, James Dean. Dean died in a car accident on September 30th, 1955, at the age of 24, and his 3 major film roles, Cal Trask in East of Eden, Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause, and Jet Rink in Giant, were enough to make him one of the most enduring figures in American cinema. He was nominated posthumously for Academy Awards for both East of Eden and Giant, the first actor to receive a posthumous Oscar nomination. His grave in Fairmount, near the town where he grew up, was for decades a major destination for fans. An annual festival in his honor still takes place every September, but the daily traffic has slowed dramatically. The fans who made the pilgrimage in the 50s and 60s have aged, and younger generations, while they may know the name, don't make the trip. Dean's appeal was something almost chemical. He represented a new kind of masculinity on screen, sensitive, rebellious, wounded. And young audiences in the 1950s responded to him with an intensity that startled the Hollywood establishment. His death at 24, in a Porsche Spyder on a California highway, only amplified the legend. He became a symbol of youth cut short, of promise unfulfilled, of the beautiful and the doomed. The crash site, near the town of Cholame, California, has its own memorial marker. But the grave itself, here in Fairmount, in the Indiana farm country where Dean grew up, still gets the occasional visitor. The crowds of the past, though, are gone. From Denver, let's fly south to Texas. We're at Sparkman Hillcrest Memorial Park in Dallas, and we're looking for a grave that connects to one of the most beloved television shows of the 1960s. Here lies Mary Kay Ash. No, wait, that's a different legend. Let's head to the right section. Here we find Larry Hagman. J.R. Ewing. The man America loved to hate on Dallas for 13 seasons, from 1978 to 1991, and then again for a revival series starting in 2012. Who Shot J.R. became the most famous cliffhanger in television history. An estimated 83 million Americans tuned in for the resolution in November 1980, making it one of the most watched broadcasts in television history at the time. Before Dallas, Hagman had already charmed audiences as the bumbling astronaut Major Tony Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie, co-starring with Barbara Eden. He was the son of Broadway legend Mary Martin, who originated the role of Peter Pan on stage. Hagman struggled with alcoholism for years and nearly died from liver failure in the mid-1990s before receiving a transplant. He became an advocate for organ donation. Larry Hagman died on November 23, 2012, from complications of throat cancer. He was 81. Continuing through Texas, let's make our way to DeKalb, a tiny town in the northeast corner of the state, and Woodman Cemetery. Here lies Dan Blocker, and if that name doesn't do it for you, one word will: Hoss. Dan Blocker played Hoss Cartwright in over 400 episodes of the classic Western series Bonanza between 1959 and 1972. Bonanza was one of the most popular shows on television during the 1960s, and a huge part of that popularity was owed to Blocker's portrayal of the gentle, lovable giant of the Cartwright family. Blocker was a big man, 6'4" and nearly 300 pounds, with a warmth that radiated through the screen. Before acting, he had served in the Army during the Korean War and earned a master's degree in dramatic arts. His death shocked the entertainment world. On May 13, 1972, Dan Blocker died from a pulmonary embolism following gallbladder surgery. He was just 43, and Bonanza was still in production. That fall, the show's writers took the unusual step of acknowledging Haas's death within the storyline, one of the first times a major television series dealt directly with the death of a lead actor. His grave in DeKalb, the town where he was born, is a long way from the Ponderosa, and it doesn't see many visitors these days. Let's head back east to Virginia to a place called Great Falls and the National Memorial Park Cemetery. Here rests Patsy Cline, one of the most influential vocalists in the history of popular music. Patsy's voice, rich, smooth, aching with emotion, transformed country music and crossed over into pop with recordings like Crazy, I Fall to Pieces, Walking After Midnight, and Sweet Dreams. She was one of the first country artists to achieve widespread pop success, paving the way for artists like Dolly Parton, Reba McEntire, and countless others who followed. Crazy, written by a young Willie Nelson, remains one of the most played jukebox songs in history. Patsy Cline's career was cut tragically short. On March 5, 1963, she was killed in a plane crash near Camden, Tennessee, along with fellow Opry stars Cowboy Copas and Hawkshaw Hawkins. She was 30 years old. Her grave at National Memorial Park, which includes a bell tower memorial dedicated to her, was once a regular destination for fans. But the years have passed and the visitors have thinned. Patsy Cline's story is one of the great what-ifs in American music. She was only 30 when she died, and she had been a major recording artist for barely 5 years. In that brief window, she produced a body of work that has only grown in stature over the decades. Her recordings have a timeless quality. They don't sound like the 1950s or 60s. They sound like forever. The emotional depth she brought to every performance was remarkable for someone so young, and musicians from every genre have cited her as an influence. Loretta Lynn, who was Patsy's close friend, spent years keeping her memory alive through stories and tributes. The 1985 film Sweet Dreams, starring Jessica Lange, introduced Patsy's story to a new generation. For a voice that still stops you in your tracks every time it comes on the radio, the quiet around her grave seems like a shame. From Virginia, let's travel to Westchester County, New York, and the beautiful Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla. This large, park-like cemetery north of New York City holds quite a few notables, but we're here for a particular kind of genius. Here rests Danny Kaye. If you grew up in the 1940s or 50s, Danny Kaye was one of the funniest, most talented performers alive. He could sing, dance, act, do impressions, perform tongue-twisting patter songs at impossible speed, and make you cry with a tender ballad. Sometimes all in the same performance. His films include The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, White Christmas, where he starred alongside Bing Crosby, Rosemary Clooney, whom we visited earlier in Kentucky, and Vera Ellen, Hans Christian Andersen, and The Court Jester. That last film contains one of the most famous comedy routines in movie history. The pellet with the poisons in the vessel with the pestle. The chalice from the palace has the brew that is true. Danny Kaye was also one of the earliest and most devoted celebrity ambassadors for UNICEF, traveling the world to advocate for children. He received the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award from the Academy in 1955 and the Kennedy Center Honor in 1984. Danny Kaye died of a heart attack on March 3, 1987, at the age of 74, following years of hepatitis and internal bleeding. His grave at Kensico is a lovely spot, surrounded by trees, but it's not the kind of place that draws crowds anymore. Let's cross the country one more time, back to Southern California, to Eden Memorial Park in Mission Hills. This Jewish cemetery in the San Fernando Valley holds the remains of quite a few entertainment figures, and we're here for one in particular, Groucho Marx. Of the 5 Marx brothers, Groucho was the one who remained famous the longest, the fast-talking, cigar-chomping, eyebrow-waggling wise guy whose one-liners have been quoted for nearly a century. With his brothers Harpo and Chico, Groucho made some of the greatest comedies in film history, including Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera. Later, on his own, he became a television star as the host of the quiz show You Bet Your Life, where his improvisational wit with contestants made the show a hit for over a decade. Groucho's humor was anarchic, irreverent, and way ahead of its time. His influence runs through everyone from Woody Allen to the writers of The Simpsons. Groucho Marx died on August 19, 1977, at the age of 86, from pneumonia. He had been in declining health for several years. His death was overshadowed in the news by the death of Elvis Presley, which had occurred 3 days earlier. The timing was so cruel that comedian and writer Dick Cavett later said Groucho would have had a joke about it. Groucho's timing was, by universal acclaim, among the finest in the history of comedy. He could turn a throwaway line into something that stayed with you for days. His wit was merciless, but never cruel. He skewered pretension and pomposity with a surgeon's precision. In his later years, he became friends with a younger generation of comedians and writers who revered him, including Woody Allen and Dick Cavett. When he died, just 3 days after Elvis, the contrast was almost too perfect. The biggest star in the world got all the headlines, while one of the funniest men who ever lived slipped away almost unnoticed. His grave at Eden Memorial Park is here in the valley, far from the spotlight, and it doesn't see many visitors. Not far from Eden Memorial, let's travel to Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth once more. We visited Ginger Rodgers earlier, but there's someone else here who deserves a stop. In the Mausoleum of Memories rests Fred Astaire. Now, you can't talk about Ginger Rodgers without talking about Fred, and vice versa. Fred Astaire is often regarded as the greatest dancer in the history of film. His elegance, his precision, his seemingly effortless grace set a standard that no one has matched. Beyond his 10 films with Ginger Rodgers, Astaire danced with virtually every major female star in Hollywood: Rita Hayworth, Sid Charisse, Audrey Hepburn, Leslie Caron. His solo numbers are works of art: the ceiling dance in Royal Wedding, the drum dance in A Damsel in Distress, and dozens more. He was also a pioneer in how dance was filmed, insisting that his routines be shot in full body, in long takes, so the audience could see every step. He received an honorary Academy Award in 1950 for his contributions to the art of dance and film. In his later years, he transitioned to dramatic acting, earning an Oscar nomination for The Towering Inferno. Fred Astaire died on June 22, 1987, from pneumonia at the age of 88. A curious piece of trivia: Fred Astaire was the very first celebrity added to the IMDb database when the website was created. His resting place here at Oakwood, just down the road from Ginger Rodgers, seems fitting. Together in film, near each other in eternity. From Southern California, let's make the long trip back east to a cemetery that sits in the shadow of a very different kind of American landmark. We're at Arlington National Cemetery, but we're not visiting a general or a president. We're here for Lee Marvin. Most people don't realize that Lee Marvin, the tough guy actor known for Point Blank, The Dirty Dozen, Cat Ballou, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, is buried at Arlington. He earned that right through his service as a United States Marine in World War II. Marvin was part of the assault on the Japanese-held island of Saipan in June 1944, where he was wounded by machine gun fire that severed his sciatic nerve. He was evacuated and spent over a year recovering in Navy hospitals. He was awarded the Purple Heart. After the war, Marvin turned to acting, and his weathered, menacing presence made him a natural for roles as villains and anti-heroes. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Cat Ballou in 1966, a rare comic performance from a man more often associated with violence on screen. He was also memorable throwing hot coffee in Gloria Graham's face in The Big Heat and as Liberty Valance in the John Ford classic. Lee Marvin died of a heart attack on August 29, 1987, at the age of 63. His headstone at Arlington is standard military issue, simple, white, uniform with thousands of others. There's nothing to distinguish it from the graves around it, which is exactly how a Marine would want it. Let's stay on the East Coast and head to Woodbury, Connecticut, and the small, quiet cemetery of the First Congregational Church. Here, far from the bustle of Hollywood, rests Jason Robards, a 2-time Academy Award winner for Best Supporting Actor, For All the President's Men in 1977 and Julia in 1978, Robards was one of the finest American actors of the 20th century, on both stage and screen. He was widely considered the definitive interpreter of the plays of Eugene O'Neill, starring in landmark productions of Long Day's Journey into Night, The Iceman Cometh, and A Moon for the Misbegotten. On screen, he brought a craggy authority to everything he touched, from his portrayal of Ben Bradley in All the President's Men, to Howard Hughes in Melvin and Howard, to Dashiell Hammett in Julia. He appeared in over 70 films. Robards served in the Navy during World War II, surviving the attack on Pearl Harbor while aboard the USS Honolulu. He battled alcoholism for years, recovered, and continued working until shortly before his death. Jason Robards died of lung cancer on December 26, 2000, at the age of 78. His grave in Woodbury, the Connecticut town where he lived, is the kind of place you'd have to go out of your way to find. Back to the world of entertainment now, and a trip to Simi Valley, California, just northwest of Los Angeles. We're at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, but we're not visiting the president. We're heading to nearby Assumption Cemetery, where we find the grave of Raymond Burr. For nearly 3 decades, Raymond Burr was one of the most familiar faces on television, starring as defense attorney Perry Mason from 1957 to 1966, and again in a series of reunion TV movies from 1985 to 1993, and as wheelchair-bound detective Robert Ironside from 1967 to 1975. Perry Mason alone ran for 271 episodes and won Burr 2 Emmy Awards. The character became so associated with the actor that Burr once said he couldn't walk down a street without someone asking him for legal advice. Before television, Burr had been a film actor, and his most memorable early role was a chilling one. Lars Thorwald, the suspected murderer in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, where he was the man James Stewart watched through binoculars. Burr was a deeply private man who kept much of his personal life out of the public eye. He died of kidney cancer on September 12, 1993, at the age of 76. His grave here in the Simi Valley area is not on most people's radar. Let's head now to Culver City, California, and Hillside Memorial Park. This Jewish cemetery on a hillside along the San Diego Freeway is known for its dramatic Al Jolson Memorial, a towering monument visible from the freeway. But we're not here for Jolson today. We're here for someone quieter, someone whose genius was in making something look effortless. Here rests Jack Benny. For over 40 years, Jack Benny was one of the most popular comedians in America. His radio show, which began in 1932, and his television show, which ran from 1950 to 1965, made him a household name. His comedy was built on persona: the eternal 39-year-old, the comically stingy tightwad, the terrible violin player. He was actually quite good. His timing was legendary. Benny could get a bigger laugh from a pause than most comedians could get from a punchline. When a mugger demanded, "Your money or your life?" and Benny replied, after an impossibly long silence, "I'm thinking it over," it became one of the most famous jokes in the history of comedy. Jack Benny died of pancreatic cancer on December 26, 1974, at the age of 80. What set Benny apart from his contemporaries was his generosity as a performer. He understood that the biggest laughs often came from being the butt of the joke, not the one delivering it. He made his supporting cast, Rochester, Dennis Day, Don Wilson, Mary Livingston, into stars by giving them the funny lines while he played the exasperated straight man. It was a radical approach to comedy that influenced everyone from Johnny Carson to Jerry Seinfeld. Off-screen, Benny was widely regarded as one of the kindest and most generous men in show business. George Burns, his lifelong best friend, said that Jack Benny was the only comedian he knew who was funnier off stage than on. Jack Benny died of pancreatic cancer on December 26, 1974, at the age of 80. His grave at Hillside is here on this beautiful hillside. But for a man who spent 40 years making America laugh every week, the visitors have become few and far between. Let's head back to the East Coast and to the Bronx, New York, to Woodlawn Cemetery. This sprawling National Historic Landmark cemetery has been the final resting place of moguls, musicians, and legends since the 19th century. Among its residents is someone whose contribution to American music cannot be overstated: Miles Davis. Now, Miles Davis isn't someone most people would describe as forgotten. His music is as revered as ever. But his grave at Woodlawn gets remarkably little foot traffic for a man who fundamentally reshaped jazz multiple times over a career that spanned 5 decades. From cool jazz to hard bop to modal jazz to jazz fusion, Miles was always at the frontier, always pushing the music forward. Kind of Blue, released in 1959, remains the best-selling jazz album of all time. Bitches Brew, released in 1970, essentially invented jazz fusion. His trumpet sound, spare, haunting, endlessly expressive, is one of the most recognizable in all of music. Miles Davis died on September 28, 1991, from a combination of a stroke, pneumonia, and respiratory failure. He was 65. Davis was also one of the great band leaders in jazz history. The musicians who passed through his groups over the years reads like a hall of fame in itself. John Coltrane, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett, and many more. He had an uncanny ability to identify young talent and to push musicians beyond what they thought they could do. He was also famously difficult, abrasive, demanding, and uncompromising in his artistic vision. But the music that resulted from that uncompromising nature speaks for itself. Kind of Blue alone would have been enough to secure his legacy. Everything else was a bonus. His grave at Woodlawn is in a cemetery full of remarkable stories, but it's not a place that draws the attention his music warrants. While we're in the New York area, let's cross over to Queens, to Mount St. Mary Cemetery in Flushing. Here lies a man who spent decades making Americans laugh every night and never got the fame he deserved: Art Carney. You might know him better as Ed Norton, the lovable, dim-witted sewer worker who lived upstairs from Ralph and Alice Cramden on The Honeymooners. Art Carney's performance as Norton is one of the greatest in the history of television comedy. His physical comedy, his timing, his childlike enthusiasm were the perfect counterbalance to Jackie Gleason's blustering Ralph. But Carney was far more than a sitcom sidekick. In 1974, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Harry and Tonto, beating out Albert Finney, Dustin Hoffman, and Jack Nicholson. Let that sink in. Ed Norton from The Honeymooners beat Dustin Hoffman and Jack Nicholson for the Oscar. He also won 6 Emmy Awards for his television work. Carney served in the Army during World War II and was wounded at Normandy, suffering a leg wound that gave him a limp for the rest of his life, a limp he incorporated into Norton's distinctive walk. Art Carney died on November 9, 2003, at the age of 85. Carney also struggled with alcoholism for much of his adult life, a battle that interrupted his career more than once. But he always came back, and when he was working, he was one of the finest comic actors in the business. His Oscar win for Harry and Tonto was not a fluke or a sentimental choice. It was recognition of a deeply felt, beautifully nuanced performance as an elderly man who takes a cross-country trip with his cat after being evicted from his New York apartment. The film is a small masterpiece, and Carney is its beating heart. His grave in Queens is not a place most people think of when they think of Oscar winners, but Art Carney proved that you don't have to be a leading man to be a great actor. From Queens, let's head south to the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania, or rather, let's redirect and head to Los Angeles one more time. We're at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City again, in a different section this time. Here rests Bing Crosby, or rather, a portion of his legacy. Actually, Bing Crosby is buried at Holy Cross, and while he's one of the biggest names in entertainment history, his grave is surprisingly unassuming. Bing Crosby was the most popular recording artist of the first half of the 20th century. White Christmas remains the best-selling single of all time. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Going My Way in 1944, playing Father Chuck O'Malley, and received a nomination for reprising the role in The Bells of St. Mary's the following year. His road movies with Bob Hope were massive hits. His baritone voice, casual delivery, and easygoing charm defined popular entertainment for an entire generation. Bing Crosby died on October 14, 1977, of a heart attack on a golf course in Spain, moments after finishing a round. He was 74. He had just said to his companions, "That was a great game of golf, fellas." Crosby's influence on popular music is sometimes underappreciated because his style became so ubiquitous that it's hard to remember what came before it. Before Bing, popular singers were essentially shouters. They had to project their voices to fill theaters without amplification. Crosby was one of the first singers to understand how to use a microphone, and his relaxed, intimate crooning style changed everything. He influenced Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Perry Como, and virtually every male pop singer who came after him. Beyond music, Crosby was one of the biggest movie stars of the 1940s, starring in films that grossed hundreds of millions of dollars. He was also an avid and accomplished golfer, which explains his final moments on that course in Spain. His grave at Holy Cross is marked simply, and while it still gets some visitors, it's not the magnet you'd expect for the voice of White Christmas. Perhaps that's fitting for a man whose style was never about grand gestures, but about the quiet art of making something very difficult look very easy. Let's return to the Los Angeles area one last time before we begin to wind down our tour. We're at Westwood Village Memorial Park again, that small but incredibly star-studded cemetery behind the office buildings. We visited a few people here already, but there's one more we can't miss. In the Corridor of Memories, there's a wall crypt that belongs to Dean Martin. Dino, the king of cool. Dean Martin was one of the most effortlessly charming entertainers who ever lived. As one half of the Martin and Lewis comedy team with Jerry Lewis, he was the biggest act in show business in the early 1950s. After the partnership dissolved, many predicted Martin would fade. Instead, he became an even bigger star, as a singer, an actor, and a member of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. His recording of That's Amore became one of the defining songs of the 50s. He starred in serious films like The Young Lions and Rio Bravo, and in comedies like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Wait, that was actually a drama with Elizabeth Taylor. Martin starred in the Matt Helm spy comedies and hosted The Dean Martin Show on television for 9 years. He projected an image of effortless cool. The cigarette, the drink, the loosened tie, the air of a man who was having more fun than anyone else in the room. But behind the persona, Dean Martin was, by most accounts, a deeply private man who preferred solitude to the spotlight. The death of his son, Dean Paul Martin, in a military jet crash in 1987, devastated him, and friends said he was never the same. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, from acute respiratory failure caused by emphysema. He was 78. His crypt at Westwood is here among many other legends, but the King of Cool doesn't draw the crowd he once did. For our final stop, let's leave the cemeteries of the famous and return to something quieter. We're in Clarkdale, Mississippi, at a small graveyard where the headstones are sparse and the ground is flat and sun-baked. This is the burial place of Sam Cooke. And if that name doesn't immediately send a melody running through your head, let me help. A change is gonna come. Sam Cooke is widely considered the inventor of soul music, the artist who took the power and passion of gospel singing and fused it with secular pop to create something entirely new. His voice was exquisite, warm, controlled, capable of heartbreaking tenderness and electrifying power, sometimes in the same phrase. His hits include You Send Me, Chain Gang, Twist in the Night Away, Cupid, and A Change Is Gonna Come, which became an anthem of the civil rights movement. He was also a savvy businessman who owned his own record label and publishing company at a time when very few black artists had that kind of control over their careers. Sam Cooke was shot and killed on December 11, 1964, at a motel in Los Angeles, under circumstances that remain disputed to this day. He was 33. His body was returned to his family, and he was buried here in this quiet corner of Mississippi, in a cemetery that feels a million miles from the stages where his voice once soared. Cooke was just 33 when he died, the same age, coincidentally, as Carole Lombard, whom we visited earlier. And like Lombard, his death robbed the world of someone who had so much more to give. A Change Is Gonna Come, released posthumously, became one of the most important songs of the civil rights era, its soaring melody and aching lyrics capturing both the pain of the present and the hope of what might come. For the man who sang that a change was gonna come, the world did change, in no small part because of his voice. But his grave, in this quiet southern plot, remains a place that hardly anyone visits anymore. The music endures. The man rests in peace. And with that, our tour comes to a close. We've traveled from Maryland to Mississippi, from Hart Island to Hollywood, from the marble mausoleums of Forest Lawn to unmarked patches of grass where legends rest without so much as a nameplate. 50 people, 50 stories. And every one of them a reminder that fame, no matter how bright it burns, is a fleeting thing. The music and the movies and the performances endure. But the places where these people came to rest have grown quiet. Maybe that's all right. Maybe the silence is its own kind of peace. But if you ever find yourself near any of these places, stop by. They could use the company. Thanks for joining us on this journey. If any of these stories stayed with you, maybe consider visiting one of these graves the next time you're nearby. You don't need flowers or fanfare. Just showing up is enough. Until next time.